I stood in the marble foyer of my childhood home, clutching the acceptance letter that had arrived 3 days ago. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with possibilities my parents would never understand. Outside, the October rain drummed against the tall windows of our Beacon Hill townhouse, the same windows I'd pressed my face against as a child, dreaming of worlds beyond these suffocating walls. "You're being ridiculous, Jonathan," my mother's voice carried from the living room where she sat with my father, their voices low but sharp. "This whole artist nonsense has gone on long enough." I hadn't told them about the letter yet. The acceptance to the prestigious Whitmore Institute for Fine Arts in Florence, Italy. A full scholarship, something that happened to maybe 5 people worldwide each year. My portfolio had caught the attention of Elena Rossetti, the legendary sculptor whose work graced museums from the Met to the Louvre. She wanted to mentor me personally. But I already knew what their reaction would be. "Jonathan, get in here," my father called, his voice carrying that tone I'd learned to dread, the one that meant decisions had already been made about my life without consulting me. I walked into the living room where they sat like judges on a tribunal. Mother had arranged herself on the cream-colored sofa, her posture perfect, her expression severe. Father stood by the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, the other holding a tumbler of whiskey despite it being barely noon. "We need to discuss your future," he began without preamble. "You graduate from Harvard in 6 months. I've arranged for you to start at Morrison & Associates immediately after. The law firm has agreed to fast-track your partnership consideration." "I haven't even applied to law school yet," I said quietly. "That's already handled. Your LSAT scores were adequate, and the dean at Harvard Law owes me a favor. You start next fall." I felt the letter in my pocket like a burning coal. What if I don't want to be a lawyer? The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's teacup clinked against its saucer as she set it down with deliberate precision. "Want?" she repeated, the word sounding foreign in her mouth. "Jonathan, you're 21 years old. It's time to stop playing with finger paints and join the real world." "I'm not playing," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'm good at this. Really good." Father's laugh was cold. "Good? You spent 4 years at Harvard studying art history instead of something useful. Do you know how much I've invested in your education? How much this family has sacrificed?" The familiar weight of guilt settled on my shoulders, but for once, I didn't let it crush me. "I never asked you to sacrifice anything." "You ungrateful," Mother started, but Father held up a hand. "Let me be clear, Jonathan," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that had terrified me as a child. "You have 2 choices. Law school and a respectable career, or you can figure out how to survive on your own. No trust fund, no family support, no safety net. We will not enable this delusion any longer." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. I thought of all the years I'd bent to their will, chosen their version of my life over my own dreams. The business major I'd hated, the internships at Father's firm, the carefully orchestrated social events where I was paraded around like a prize they'd won. "And if I choose law school?" I asked. "Then you inherit everything," Mother said, her voice warming slightly. "The house in the Hamptons, the art collection, your grandfather's portfolio. Everything we've built will be yours." The art collection. I almost laughed at the irony. Hundreds of pieces worth millions, acquired not for love but for status. Paintings and sculptures they'd never truly seen, only valued for their price tags and the prestige they brought at dinner parties. I pulled the letter from my pocket and placed it on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" Father asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected. "The Whitmore Institute in Florence," I said. "Full scholarship. Personal mentorship with Elena Rossetti." Mother picked up the letter with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate her. She read it, her face growing paler with each line. "Absolutely not," she said, tearing the letter in half. "I won't have a son who's a starving artist, living in some Italian slum, embarrassing this family." The sound of tearing paper was like a slap. I watched the pieces flutter to the floor, my future scattered like confetti. You just destroyed the opportunity of a lifetime, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I just saved you from ruining your life, she replied. I looked at them both, these people who claimed to love me but had never once asked what I wanted, what made me happy, what I dreamed about when I stared out those tall windows. Then I choose to ruin it, I said. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Father set down his whiskey glass with a sharp click. Fine, he said. You have until tomorrow to pack your things. After that, you're no longer welcome in this house. And Jonathan. He paused, his eyes cold as winter. Don't come crawling back when reality hits. This family doesn't reward failure. I spent that night in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life I was about to abandon. The walls were covered with my sketches and paintings, work my parents had tolerated but never celebrated. I packed light, clothes, art supplies, and the small canvas I'd been working on, a portrait of the view from my window. The next morning, I left without saying goodbye. The first year in Florence was harder than I'd ever imagined. The scholarship covered tuition and a small stipend, but living expenses in the historic city center were brutal. I rented a tiny apartment above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread was my only luxury. Some nights, that bread was also my dinner. I worked part-time at a tourist gallery, hawking mass-produced prints to Americans who wanted authentic Italian art. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was selling fake culture to people who probably knew my parents. But Elena Rossetti's mentorship was everything I'd hoped for and more. She was demanding, uncompromising, and brilliant. Under her guidance, my work began to transform. You have talent, she told me after 6 months, but talent means nothing without hunger. Are you hungry, Jonathan? I was literally hungry most days, but I knew that wasn't what she meant. Yes, I said. Good. Comfortable artists make comfortable art. The world doesn't need more comfortable art. Meanwhile, back in Boston, my parents told their friends I was taking a gap year to find myself, and would be starting law school the following fall. They'd hired a private investigator to track my whereabouts, not out of concern but to ensure I wasn't embarrassing the family name. I learned this from my younger sister Sharon, who'd secretly kept in touch despite our parents' wishes. She was 16 and still under their control, but she sent me care packages and updates on the family drama. They're furious, she texted one night. Dad's been calling your professors, trying to get you expelled. He says you're having a mental breakdown. The news didn't surprise me, but it stung. Even from 3,000 miles away, they were trying to control my narrative. My breakthrough came in my second year. I'd been working on a series of sculptures that combined classical techniques with modern materials, marble and bronze mixed with found objects from the streets of Florence. The pieces were raw, emotional, and deeply personal. They told the story of abandonment, of choosing authentic struggle over comfortable lies. Elena entered one of my pieces in the Venice Biennale, the most prestigious contemporary art exhibition in the world. The Prodigal Son was a life-sized figure carved from Carrara marble, its back turned to the viewer, forever walking away from an ornate bronze door that would never open again. The piece was acquired by the Guggenheim before the exhibition even opened. Sharon was the first to congratulate me, sending screenshots of the glowing reviews from major art publications. Dad saw it in the New York Times, she wrote. He looked like he was going to have a heart attack. The success of The Prodigal Son opened doors I'd never imagined. Gallery owners from New York, London, and Tokyo began reaching out. My work was featured in art magazines, and suddenly, the struggling artist living above a bakery was being hailed as one of the most promising young sculptors of his generation. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. 3 years after leaving Boston, I received an email from Harrison Blackwood, the director of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the same museum my parents had dragged me to for countless fundraising galas, never suspecting that I was absorbing every detail of every piece we passed. Mr. Morrison, the email read, we would be honored to host a solo exhibition of your work. Your reputation has preceded you, and we believe you represent the future of American sculpture. Please let us know if you'd be interested in discussing terms. I stared at the email for a long time, my heart racing. A solo exhibition at the MFA was career-defining. It was also perfectly, poetically positioned. I accepted immediately. The exhibition, titled Exile and Return, was scheduled for the following spring. I spent months preparing, creating new pieces specifically for the Boston audience. The centerpiece would be a massive installation called The Inheritance, a series of bronze figures arranged around an empty pedestal, their hands reaching toward nothing, their faces turned away from each other. As the opening date approached, I flew back to Boston for the first time in 4 years. The city looked smaller somehow, less imposing than it had in my memory. I stayed at a hotel near the museum, not far from the house where I'd grown up. The night before the opening, Sharon called me. She was 20 now, a sophomore at Brown University, studying theater against our parents' wishes. They'd learned to pick their battles. They suspect, she told me, her voice tense. The name Jonathan Cross Morrison in the art magazines, they've been asking questions. Dad's been making calls to his connections, trying to confirm if it's really you. I'd been using my full name professionally, including the middle name Cross that my parents had given me after my great-grandfather but rarely used. It was enough distance to build my career without immediate family recognition, but not enough to hide forever. What did you tell them? I asked. Nothing. But they're planning to attend the opening tomorrow night. Dad thinks if it really is you, it'll be the perfect opportunity to manage the situation before it gets out of hand. I smiled grimly. Even now, he thought he could control the narrative. Are you coming to the opening? I asked. Wouldn't miss it, she said. And Jonathan, I'm proud of you. For what it's worth. The opening reception was everything I'd dreamed of and more. The gallery was packed with collectors, critics, and art lovers. My pieces looked magnificent under the museum's professional lighting, each one telling part of the story I'd been too afraid to speak out loud for years. Elena had flown in from Florence for the opening, along with several other important figures from the international art world. As I stood in the main gallery, watching people engage with my work, truly seeing it, I felt a completeness I'd never experienced before. Then I saw them. My parents entered the gallery at precisely 8 o'clock, fashionably late as always. They were dressed for the occasion. Father in his tailored tuxedo, mother in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than I'd spent on rent in my first year in Florence. But their usual social grace seemed strained tonight. They moved through the crowd with purpose, their eyes scanning, searching. They hadn't seen me yet, but I watched them encounter my work. Father stopped in front of The Prodigal Son, studying the marble figure with the same analytical gaze he brought to legal briefs. Mother examined the placard beside it, her face confirming what they'd already suspected. Jonathan Cross Morrison, she read aloud, her voice barely audible above the crowd. Father's jaw tightened. They'd come tonight not as casual art patrons, but as parents confronting the truth they'd been dreading, and perhaps secretly hoping for. Harrison Blackwood chose that moment to approach them. I couldn't hear the conversation from across the room, but I saw Mother's hand flutter to her throat, saw Father's jaw tighten as Harrison spoke animatedly about the artist's vision and technique. Then Harrison gestured toward me, and our eyes met across the crowded gallery. The journey through the crowd felt like walking underwater. People congratulated me, patted my shoulder, praised my work, but I barely heard them. My focus was entirely on my parents, who stood frozen beside my sculpture like they'd been turned to stone themselves. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, Harrison said as I approached, his voice warm with professional enthusiasm, I'd like you to meet the artist. Jonathan Morrison, this is. We know who they are, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening despite the chatter of the crowd around us. Mother's champagne glass trembled in her hand. Father looked like he was calculating damage control, already planning how to spin this development to their social circle. Hello, Mother. Father. Jonathan, Mother whispered, and for a moment, she looked genuinely vulnerable. We didn't know. That your son was the J. Morrison everyone's been talking about? Harrison interjected, oblivious to the tension. Jonathan's work has been creating quite a stir in the international art community. The Guggenheim acquisition was just the beginning. We're expecting this exhibition to tour major museums worldwide. Father found his voice first. That's impressive, he said, the word seeming to stick in his throat. More than impressive, Harrison continued. Revolutionary. The way Jonathan combines classical technique with contemporary themes, the emotional depth of his work, it's exactly the kind of art that defines a generation. I watched my parents absorb this information, watched them recalibrate their understanding of who I was and what I'd become. The son they disowned was now being celebrated by the very cultural institutions they'd spent their lives trying to impress. Perhaps, I said, looking directly at my father, you'd like to see the rest of the exhibition? I led them through the gallery, watching them encounter piece after piece that told the story of our family's fracture. The ultimatum depicted two towering figures looming over a smaller one, their shadows creating a cage of darkness. Empty rooms showed the hollow spaces left behind when love is conditional. We stopped in front of The Inheritance, the centerpiece installation. The bronze figures seemed to pulse with life under the gallery lights, their desperate reaching creating a tableau of want and disappointment. This one's about family, I said, my voice carrying just enough for them to hear. About the things we think we want, and the cost of wanting them. Mother was crying now, silent tears that tracked down her carefully made-up cheeks. Jonathan, The remarkable thing about this piece, I continued, ignoring her attempt to speak, is that it's already been acquired by a private collector. Someone who understands the value of authentic expression over manufactured respectability. Father's face was stone. How much? He asked, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. More than the partnership at Morrison & Associates pays in 5 years, I said. But money was never really the point, was it? The crowd around us had begun to notice the drama unfolding, though they maintained polite distance. I could see Harrison hovering nearby, unsure whether to intervene. You've made your point, Father said, his voice low and tight. You've succeeded. Congratulations. Have I? I asked. Because success isn't just about achievement. It's about being seen, being valued for who you are rather than who others want you to be. Mother stepped forward, her hand reaching toward me before stopping mid-air. We were trying to protect you, she said, her voice breaking. We were trying to save you from disappointment. You were trying to save yourselves from embarrassment, I replied. There's a difference. The truth of it hung between us like a chasm. Around us, the gallery continued its elegant dance of art appreciation, but our small circle existed in a bubble of reckoning. Sharon appeared at my elbow, having navigated through the crowd. She looked radiant in a simple black dress, her face glowing with pride and defiance. Mom, Dad, she said, her voice steady. Quite a turnout for your son's exhibition. The possessive pronoun hit like a physical blow. Their son. After 4 years of disowning me, of pretending I didn't exist, I was suddenly theirs again now that I was worth claiming. Sharon, Mother said, composing herself slightly. You knew about this? I've known about Jonathan's success for years, she replied. I've been following his career, buying his pieces when I could afford them. I'm probably his biggest fan. I felt a swell of gratitude toward my sister, who had chosen loyalty over comfort, truth over convenience. Perhaps, I said, looking at my parents, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. We moved to Harrison's office, a quiet space away from the celebration. The walls were lined with catalogs from previous exhibitions, decades of artistic achievement reduced to coffee table books. I don't understand, Mother said once we were seated. You were always talented, but this is extraordinary. How did I become successful without your approval? I finished. The same way I became an artist. By choosing authenticity over comfort. Father leaned forward, his business instincts surfacing. What do you want, Jonathan? An apology? Recognition? We can work something out. The offer hung in the air, and I realized this was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since I'd left their house 4 years ago. They were ready to deal, to negotiate terms for my return to the family fold. "I want you to understand something," I said. "When you gave me that ultimatum, you thought you were teaching me a lesson about reality. But you actually taught me something much more valuable, that I could survive without your approval. That I could thrive without it." Sharon reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't need them to validate your success," she said softly. "But perhaps," I continued, "you need my success to validate your choices." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Through the office window, I could see the gallery still buzzing with activity, people engaging with my work, seeing the story I'd been too afraid to tell when I lived under their roof. "The exhibition will run for 6 months," I said finally. "It will travel to New York, Los Angeles, London, and Tokyo. My work will be seen by millions of people, and my story, our story, will be told in art magazines and newspapers around the world." Father's face had gone pale. He understood the implications immediately. Their friends, their social circle, their carefully constructed reputation would all be forced to confront the truth of what they'd done. "You could have been part of this," I said. "You could have been proud parents celebrating their son's achievement. Instead, you'll be the people who almost destroyed him." Mother broke down completely then, her composure cracking like an eggshell. "We were wrong," she sobbed. "We were so terribly wrong. Can you forgive us?" I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. She seemed smaller than I remembered, more fragile. The perfect facade she'd maintained for decades was crumbling, revealing the frightened woman beneath. "I forgave you years ago," I said, and realized it was true. "Not for your sake, but for mine." Carrying anger was too heavy. "Then you'll come home?" Father asked, hope creeping into his voice. "I am home," I said. "My home is in Florence, working with Elena, creating art that matters. This," I gestured around the office, toward the gallery beyond, "this is just a visit." The rejection landed like a physical blow. They'd expected drama, perhaps, or demands for restitution. They hadn't expected indifference. "But we're your family," Mother said desperately. "You're my parents," I corrected. "Family is something different. Family supports your dreams even when they don't understand them. Family loves you for who you are, not who they need you to be." Sharon smiled at that, understanding passing between us. "I have a family," I continued. "Elena, who saw my potential when I couldn't see it myself. The other artists in Florence who shared their bread when I was hungry. The collectors and critics who took a chance on an unknown American sculptor. The people who believed in me when you wouldn't." The finality of it settled over the room like dust. My parents sat in stunned silence, perhaps finally understanding that their son hadn't just left them, he'd outgrown them. "However," I said, standing to leave, "you're welcome to stay for the rest of the reception. I believe there's a piece you haven't seen yet." I led them back into the gallery, to a smaller room where my newest work was displayed. It was a simple piece, 2 figures carved from the same block of marble, one reaching toward the other, separated by a gap that could be bridged but never eliminated. "Conditional Love," I said, reading the title aloud. "It's about the space between what we offer and what we need." Mother approached the sculpture, her fingers almost touching the marble before she caught herself. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's honest," I replied. The reception continued around us, but we stood in our own bubble of complicated truth. 4 years of separation couldn't be undone in a single conversation, but perhaps understanding could begin. "I'd like to try," Mother said suddenly. "To understand. To be better." "I'd like that too," Father added, though his voice carried less conviction. I nodded, not committing to anything but not closing the door entirely. "We'll see." As the evening wound down and the last of the guests filtered out, I found myself alone in the gallery with my work. The pieces looked different now, having been witnessed by the people who had inspired them. The story was complete, told and received. Elena approached, her heels clicking on the marble floor. How do you feel? She asked in her accented English. Free, I said, surprising myself with the honesty of it. Good. Freedom is the only foundation for real art. We stood together in comfortable silence, artist and mentor, looking at the visual representation of a young man's journey from suffocation to liberation. What's next? She asked. I thought about it, the exhibitions planned, the commissions already lined up, the life I'd built from nothing but determination and talent. More truth, I said. More honest work. And your family? I glanced toward the office where my parents were still talking with Harrison, probably discussing the logistics of being suddenly proud of a son they'd tried to erase. They'll figure it out, I said. Or they won't. Either way, I'll be fine. As I walked out of the museum that night, past the pieces that told my story in bronze and marble, I felt the weight of their expectations finally lift from my shoulders. I'd spent 21 years trying to be the son they wanted, and 4 years proving I could be the man I chose to become. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Florence, to the small apartment above the bakery, to the studio where Elena would be waiting with new challenges and impossibilities to achieve. My parents would have to live with the reality of who I was, not who they'd tried to force me to be. The prodigal son hadn't returned home. He'd brought home to the place where he'd always belonged, in the space between intention and creation, where art lives and truth is carved from stone. And for the first time in my life, that was exactly where I wanted to be.
Love this story of karma striking back? Subscribe to Karma's Counter-Strike for more, and share your own family drama in the comments.